Thank you, Mr President. I beg to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what actions the Department is taking to tackle the delays for passengers going through security at Ronaldsway Airport.
Minister for Infrastructure to reply. Mr Harmer.
Thank you, Mr President. The Department regrets that some passengers have had to queue for longer than usual recently at Ronaldsway. The Department is taking a number of steps to alert passengers to the issue and how they might be able to help in speeding up the process. For example, we've started a social media campaign to remind passengers that they should be at the airport in good time for their flight, and they should keep a close watch on gate closure times for particular airlines, and that they may need to allow slightly longer at busy times of day. This information is also contained at the Department's website. Other advice includes how to best pack cabin baggage and how to prepare for going through the security process. There's also signage at the airport in the queuing area giving guidance. The Department is also considering the layout of the security processing area in which the security equipment is located. This has been changed a number of times over the last 7 to 8 years, but we will look at it again. One further piece of work is the reconsideration of the security manning levels at peak times in the security processing area. The second set of equipment is located in the area as a backup. If there were no backup equipment, then every item of cabin baggage would have to be searched by hand if the scanning equipment failed. Peak times at security are about 30 to 40 minutes in the morning and again in the evenings. We could use the second security scanning equipment at these times, but our contract operator would be unlikely to persuade additional staff to come in to work for the two brief times each day. Even if the contractor offered 3-hour shifts, it's expected to have an offer premium pay rate to secure adequate staffing. The contractor has suggested the annual cost of operating the second line for 2 daily peaks would be approximately £150,000. I know that we are all used to being able to arrive at the airport with perhaps half an hour to spare before the flight time, but we now have much larger aircraft operated by airlines that can specify earlier check-in times so that they can pre-board up to 186 passengers and keep their turnaround times to a minimum. That, with near record passenger numbers and high load factors, have increased demand at the airport. All airports have busy periods in security, as anyone returning to the island on a regular basis will know. I will continue to investigate what can be done to balance the need for proper standards of security with the ease of use, but for now I must encourage passengers to allow plenty of time and to be ready to pass quickly through the security area.
Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr President. Can I thank the Minister for the second half of his answer, because, to be honest, the first half sounded more like the Department was burying its head in the sand over the issue. Can I ask the Minister, he stated there that it's because, that basically people travelling through in recent times have experienced long delays, but in fact, to be honest, it's now becoming the norm, Mr President, and that's the issue. I had one businessman who basically stated to me that he'd never seen anything quite like it, and he's quite a well-travelled businessman. So would the Minister accept that it does have an impact on the island's reputation? Would he firstly accept that? But can I also ask, would they also look longer term maybe at the flight scheduling? Because when you actually look at the schedule of flights coming into the island, you do seem to get a logjam of several flights both coming in and then leaving, rather than it being spread throughout the day. So can I ask the Minister, has the Department looked at that and seen if the scheduling itself is an actual problem?
Minister.
Right, okay, there's a number of points in there. But what I would like to stress is, obviously, one of the key differences to perhaps 10 years ago, when we had similar passenger numbers, there were many more aircraft, many smaller aircraft, and now there's been a change to larger aircraft, and particularly some of the bigger providers, and in one instance, because of increased demand, they've actually put on the next stage, and rather than A319, a bit on an A320, which has increased to 30-35 seats. We've actually seen demand, and as I say, we're near at the sort of record levels, but with much fewer aircraft, and that's why you do get those concentrations. Obviously, you know, scheduling is something that can be looked at, but we need to remember that they also configure with other airports and with their hub times, and so obviously they need to consider with that. I think it does vary at different times. I do want certainly to have more data, and we certainly are looking at it, and certainly looking at the costs. But I think there has to be. We need to ensure that we do. There has been an anticipation of getting to the airport, and we need to be fully prepared. And we would recommend that if you are checking online, that you would allow about an hour. An hour, and if you are checking, if you're not checking, if you're checking the airport, between 80 and 90 minutes.
Feels like a year.
Might feel like a year.
Dr. Allenson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the Minister for his response. Would he agree that passenger numbers going through Ronaldsway is eminently predictable? We know when the plane's going to leave, we know the passenger numbers going through, and so these sort of waits are unacceptable for people on the Isle of Man or visitors, and surely his department is responsible for introducing greater flexibility with the contractors who are doing the security checks, making sure that they use the additional equipment that's lying unused at the moment, and making sure that people can get onto their planes on time, especially when they check in on time, but are then left in long delays, snaking right the way through the airport.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Mr. President. Let's first, in one issue that's really important is the second one is a backup. That was his primary focus. It wasn't there as to do 50% of the air traffic. And again, if people have checked in online, then it's still important that you leave enough time. Certainly with EasyJet, you need 40 minutes for even booking. You've got to allow enough time through security, and that's really, really important. We do know there are it is predictable, and we do see load factors during the morning and the evening. That's where the highest demand is. At other times, it's much, much less. And it is something that, as I said, we are looking into, but it will mean additional staff and additional costs.
Member Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. President. You took my pun there, I'm afraid, so that's gone out the window. But I've got two supplementaries which I'll wrap up in one. Can I ask the Minister, just following on there from the Honourable Member for Ramsey, Dr. Allenson, what demand planning does the department do on an annual basis in relation to flows through the airport? And if they don't have anything formal in place, will the department be instituting it? And the second supplementary, Mr. President, shall throw in at the same time, is the Minister mentioned that demand has been up at this level before, but this is the first time I can certainly ever recall queues like this. So what has changed between then and now? And if the Minister isn't certain, will he find out?
Thank you. It's been for a long time, since before the financial crisis in the UK in 2006. As I said before, we had many more small aircraft, many more suppliers at those times, going to many different airports. We now have much larger airports, so you are now catenating a lot of passengers in a very short period of time that all need pre-boarding and all of those kind of figures. So it is a very different situation to what it was 12 years ago. I mean, obviously, it is something that we look at, and obviously something we'll look in further, and certainly something that I want more data on. But I think certainly more data on those various times during the day. But it is, as I say, it is something we are considering and are looking at. But I do stress it's important to allow enough time to get through the airport.
Member for Ramsey, Mr. Hooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Minister's kindly outlined that it's managed now by a contractor. So when this contract was tendered, were acceptable security waiting times placed in the contract? If so, what are they? And if not, why not?
Minister.
In terms of levels of times, I'm something that, in terms of what we all anticipate or what we expect, that's something that I will be driving through. In terms of the contract, I don't have the exact details, but as I said before, the times do vary. Sometimes the going through checkout, through the security process is relatively short. As I say, there have been increasing load factors. Some of this is a success story, it has to be said, where for example, if we take EasyJet, they've actually had more demand than they expected, so they've put on the bigger plane perhaps within a few days. So we are seeing load factors in 90% and so forth. That recently that has been a success for the island. Obviously, we've got to respond to that, and that's why we review.
And thank you, Mr. President. I mean, EasyJet and Flybe are servicing the island for many years, and like my colleague from Douglas Hall, I can't remember actually experienced this problem previously. Would the Minister agree then it simply seems to be a staffing issue and not actually the consumer that's at fault here?
Mr.
As I say, I mean, without going through specific details and specific times, as I say, there is a demand. There are obviously passengers now with online checking. Just need to be mindful. We all used to check in and get to the airport a lot earlier. As I said, I would allow an hour before the scheduled takeoff time if you're checking in the airport between 80 and 90 minutes. It is something that we are reviewing and looking at and gaining more data so that we can adequately put a response. But we have had a particular peak in the last couple of months.
Final supplementary, Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. President. Final supplementary. Can I ask the Minister, I'm still not clear on whether or not the Department has in place proper demand planning. So can I ask the Minister, if he's not certain here now, to go away and then circulate to honourable members what demand planning is in place by the Department and what their formal processes are to plan for future demand?
Minister.
I certainly will give consideration to what we're planning to do and circulate more information on that to members. But as I said before, there is a misconception that the two machines were for permanent use. They're not. At the end of the day, if they fail and we have to go to hand selecting baggage, it will take much longer than what it is. One of them is a prime backup, and that needs to be remembered. So we need to have that in the full consideration. Like I say, I have asked for a review of the whole area and a review of what measures we can take.